We're going to see how it folds into the global markets and, of course, into the dollar. A student of that is Marvin Barth. He's founder of Thematic Markets and does a wonderful cross-asset analysis right now. Let's just start with basics, Dollar 101. Surprising resiliency in the dollar. Does it sustain?
Yeah, I think we are in the midst of an unheralded dollar cycle like you've never seen one before. This was actually the first piece of research I turned out at Thematic Markets. It's about what's driving dollar cycles. I go back and look through time at what drives these big, huge, previously 17-year cycles. And what it seems to relate to is innovation cycles that come out of the U.S. and drive CapEx cycles. And until the CapEx cycle finishes, the dollar doesn't finish. We're not done with the CapEx cycle.
I mean, John, you thought Conda Chief paid for the Washington Capitals. He doesn't. So if you believe in a Conda Chief cycle and you're going to tie it into innovation, that screams to me American excellence. Is that overplayed?
I don't think it is. I think there's actually a couple different things here going on. One of the things that's very different from this dollar cycle from past ones is the shortness of the investment cycle. So as we are seeing every day, the technology cycle is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So the U.S. is still running ahead of everybody in a way it didn't in those previous cycles. The second is, take a look at the data. U.S. per capita incomes left Europe behind in 1990 and have never looked back. There's no convergence anymore. And now it's starting to happen versus emerging markets.
What's interesting here, John, is your investment cycle on your ARM shares was what? 2.5 days?
You're going to get me in trouble. Just for the record, no ARM shares at all, none at all. Okay, are we done with that?
We're done with that.
Okay, good.
I'll move it forward. There is this question, though, about what this means in terms of central bank policy, or if that's not relevant, because people here are expecting the ECB to be dealing with a more intractable wage spiral and inflation problem than the one in the U.S., and that's going to leave a tighter ECB policy, all things considered, for longer than in the U.S. Are you saying that that really doesn't feature in here in terms of the dollar cycle?
Oh, I think it absolutely does. But remember, I think one of the key things people forget is central banks don't actually set rates. They respond to the economy. It's, you know, if you look at the Fed's forecast, they didn't tell you they were going to go this high. They had to because the economy told them to. All the things you were highlighting earlier about the mystery about why the economy is doing so much better than expected, why earnings and the equity market is doing so much better than expected. This is all a technology cycle. They have to respond.
If that thesis holds true, then wouldn't the Chinese yuan be doing better than it currently is, considering the innovation cycle around electric vehicles and how underestimated that has been based on the recent reaction from German auto manufacturers?
So, Lisa, this is a great question, and I think it's one of the things that, if I go back to some of my previous research, I got wrong early on. I thought it was all about the tech companies. It's not. It's about something called localization. If you look in the data, it's not geopolitics or COVID or any of that. Those accelerated it. That has been driving the move away from globalization. It's been localization of production that's been enabled by technology. Nobody's doing that better right now than the U.S. That's what's driving this.
Haven't we also proven that preventing conflict through trade has totally failed?
Well, you can go back to World War I. Who were the two largest trading partners of each other? The UK and Germany. This is a failed concept. I don't understand why people thought it was going to work this time, but it doesn't.
Where does that leave China?
Well, China has its own set of problems, right? So China pursued this massive industrialization policy through subsidizing capital, repressing consumption. The same thing that many of its East Asian predecessors did. It's just done it on a much grander scale. But it now is going to have to pay the price. Fortunately for China, it's the creditor to itself. So like Japan, you're not going to have a global financial crisis type thing. You're just going to have a lost decade or so.
Which is the reason why, and John asked me this question earlier this morning, what's the most important meeting this week? The Fed, the Bank of England, or the Bank of Japan?
So I do think the Bank of Japan is really the most interesting one. The Fed, they are finally caught up with the curve. Yeah. That doesn't mean that they're at the end, but they actually have a chance to pause. And so a toss-up there. But the Bank of Japan is actually potentially changing course.
But I love the big picture you're taking. I'm going to go back to a podcast David Merritt did with Mariana Mazzucato. He's one of my favorite people here on economic history. Are we at a junction here, as Mazzucato would say, where there is a new, where leadership, like at the UN, can actually piece together a new world? Or is it going to be a Marvin Barsh slog here forward?
So one of the things I've highlighted about this theme of localization is that this is actually wholly new in human history. We actually have records going back 300,000 years, before actual Homo sapiens existed, of increasing levels of trade among hominids. As you know, it's all David Ricardo's specialization of labor, right? What changes that? When I can substitute a machine for all different variants of human activity, intellectual and physical, why do I need to use the cheapest labor anywhere in the world to trade with that specialized labor?
Do I need a new iPhone? That's what I want. I just want to know, Marvin, do I need a new iPhone? Going back to Ricardo.
Yes, because they're limiting your memory and speed.
They are. Thank you. It's all nanometers, 3 nanometers.
We'll leave that there. Marvin Barth there of Thematic Markets. If you are just tuning in,
Can you come back tomorrow?
Of course.
Equity futures on the S&P. Just